My dear learners and counselors of Baba Saheb Ambedkar Open University, perhaps for all of us, it is one of the most privileged moment and day when two of the greatest scholars, most distinguished scholars are available to us. And I think a university justifies its name when the scholars of reputed distinctions visit the university and they are available to us and we can make use of their scholarship, their experience and the work that they have done. On behalf of the university in general and particularly on my own self, I welcome Professor Sheldon Pollock, who is Professor of Sanskrit and South Asian Studies at the University of Columbia, and those who are interested in cultural studies and Sanskrit, Bhashas and our literary and cultural transactions. It would be their misfortune if they do not know his name. Similarly, the person who guided all of us, particularly I can say that's the case with me at least, the person whom I think as my guide, as my teacher also, indirect teachers, because the people from whom we learn a lot is Professor Shitanshu Chandra. I think in India, all of us know the contribution that he has made through the Sahitya Academy when he was there with the project of Indian literature, then as professor at MS University, then the Vice Chancellor of Saurashtra University, Rajkot. That was the most learning period for me from him and shaping the department the way we could. And thereafter, he has been conferred with the Padma Shri. So the honor that the scholarship in Gujarati and Indian literature has got is primarily through him. We know him as a poet for Jatayu and Odysseus Halesu. Beautifully it begins, Devo ne daityo ne saral kari nakhyo te pehla nu samudra mein joyo che. So the poet of that stature, responsible for modernizing Gujarati poetry, is with us, and we would remember him for his collection, which was primarily in the form of his lectures, Asya Sarg Vidav, and a couple of articles that I enjoyed reading. That includes the article that Professor Pulok published in his anthology, that is from Hemchandrachari to Hind Swaraj. The article from which we can learn the ways and methodology of literary historiography in terms of Indian languages. I would take this opportunity to welcome both these reputed scholars with us, and we would use this opportunity to discuss things that have been part of our history, things that the past, that conditions are present, and what has happened to us and what is happening to us and what might happen to us in terms of cultural and literary studies. Primarily, I would request these two great scholars to talk between them, but it can be amongst us also if the things happen, things go on in that particular direction. I would, sir, begin with a kind of discussion on a point that pertains to your area, and that is your views about Sanskrit as such, as a professor. That one can see that you studied and you wrote about Sanskrit, phase of almost admiration, Sanskrit as cosmopolis, the area that it covered, the vast area of southern Asia that it covered. Thereafter, the kind of what one can say, quote unquote, death, and the relationship between Sanskrit and bhashas. And then in quote unquote death, some might see it as a kind of celebrationist attitude, but in your case it is like lamentation also.
No, I wouldn't say it's lamentation or celebration. It's the interest I've had over the years has been to try to make sense of the historical development of Sanskrit and its relationship both to regional culture in South Asia and to political power in South Asia. And in the same way that I see Sanskrit having a special moment of transition in the early centuries of the Common Era, where it takes on new tasks, new modes of expression, new relations with political power. So, 1,500 years later, its history begins to transform in some fundamental way, and the purposes that it once fulfilled begin to shift, and Sanskrit no longer achieves the kind of, or retains the kind of salience for South Asian intellectuals that it once had. So I describe this, for want of a better word, as death. Maybe it's an unfortunate term, but something powerful and transformative happens to the world of Sanskrit learning in the period just before the colonial expansion, European expansion, comes to India. So I'm interested in this long, say, 1,500-year period, and I neither celebrate it nor lament it. It's my interest is as a historian. But also, I'm interested equally in what the past, as you rightly put it, what the past can tell us about the present, and what resources, intellectual, political, cultural resources the past might still offer us in the present. So I'm not a very, my scholarship is not terribly emotional, it's more historical, I can put it that way.
I think the key word there is transformation that Professor Pollock used. Because things do get transformed, ceaselessly almost. But there are some junctures where that ceaseless transformation heightens, and it marks not only a transition, but at times a point of beginning, a point of end, so to say. As poets, both in the Western tradition and Indian tradition, like to say, a point of end does get transformed into a point of beginning when something ends.
Right.
Now, when we see the relationship of Sanskrit with Gujarati, I'm reminded of two poets. One is Akho, our Gnani poet, Gnan Margi poet of the 16th century, and another his immediate successor, Premanand, who was a performer. So Akho uses an interesting metaphor for the relationship of Sanskrit and Gujarati. He says Sanskrit is like Bandhyo Rupiyo. That means the whole coin of a rupee. And Gujarati is like the small change. And he says, in order to go to the marketplace, you need small change.
Oh, great.
So when I read Professor Pollock's extraordinary book, globally influential book, on the language of gods in the world of men, I was reminded of this metaphor by Akho, that yes, when it enters the world of men, this language has to change itself from a big coin, big value coin. It has to transform itself into small coins, chiller. But Premanand has another kind of relationship. He was a performer, so he was competing. with others for the market. So the marketing of a language is also very important. Marketing of literature is also very important. The Premalin says, Apasa Vyas Vache Sanskrit. Apasa Maru Prakrit. That means Gujarati.
Yeah.
Vyas Katha Kahe ne Rade. Chalio Jao Shudhe Sherade. On this side is Vyas reciting from Sanskrit. And on the other hand, I am reciting Prakrit, that is Gujarati. Vyas, poor fellow, tells his katha and weeps to arouse emotions wrongly. He is sentimental, while I am the narrator. I narrate in a masterful way. So these are the two relationships of Sanskrit in one modern Indian language.
Sir, this is the most wonderful point that you mentioned, because there is a lot of misunderstanding of relationship between Sanskrit and bhashas. That is hegemony of Sanskrit and parasitic nature, whatever it is. But in all our languages, there are quite a few instances of symbiotic relationship between the two. Sanskrit and even in Tamil Nadu, in 13th, 14th century, they say that Tamil and Sanskrit, there is no difference, because they are like, if there is a difference, then it is like Yajurveda and Rig Veda. So this is what Shaiv Nayatkumar said in the 13th century or so.
You know, I think you raise a very interesting point about symbiosis as opposed to hegemony. One of the things that I try to show in my recent book through a comparative study of the Sanskrit relationship to the bhashas and Latin's relationship to the European languages. And if you want to see hegemony, go to Europe. I'll just cite one interesting fact. When Latin spread throughout the world of the Western Mediterranean, wherever it went, it destroyed the languages that it encountered. So today the languages, the pre-Latin languages of North Africa, Punic, for example, Celtic in Western Europe, Gaelic, these languages have all been utterly destroyed. As Sanskrit moved through the world of South and Southeast Asia, not only did it not destroy the languages that encountered, but it made their literary histories possible. Through, as you rightly point out, through a kind of symbiotic relationship of fostering, sometimes contested and fraught, but nonetheless, I think ultimately a supportive and nurturing relationship. So much that I think one of the things that the history of Sanskrit and the Desha Bhashas show is that it's been possible for Indian poets to be both global and to be local simultaneously, that many poets didn't have to choose between affiliation to the Sanskrit world and affiliation to the local world. You find, for example, in Karnataka, an area that I've studied to some degree, you find Kannadiga poets taking the best of the Sanskrit world and transforming it into the Desi mode, in a kind of beautiful interaction with the global Sanskrit. I think South Asia shows a history of remarkable resources from which we can learn, actually, about how to remain part of our local world while participating in a large, even global culture.
Two very important phrases that were used by both of you. One was regarding globalization of Sanskrit culture. I think that's the terms Professor Pollock has used in one of his articles. And first of all, the question comes, what was that Sanskrit culture? And if Sanskrit culture was the culture of knowledge, that in one way or other exists almost without any break, so-called break, in our bhashas also. So we would be very glad if both of you throw some light on that. That as far as that Sanskrit culture of knowledge was concerned, that continued, unfortunately, through the kind of education system from which we came, that insulated the departments in this country. One of the worst things, rather I would say linguistic partition that took place in this country, that took place on our campuses. That is Department of English or Department of Gujarati, Department of... Because this country has never been monolingual. So if you have a Department of English, the department, if the department exists in Gujarat, it should teach at least 30% of Gujarati literature in one way or other.
In fact, Professor Avdesh Singh has been a pioneer at Saurashtra University in initiating the interaction between the departments of English and other departments. For example, Avdesh Bhai's book on colonialism and Renaissance has an article by Professor Namar Singh and several other professors, several other teachers of Gujarati and Marathi and other languages. So that book and that approach was very interesting. And I think interaction not only between Sanskrit and English, or languages of power, if I may use that word, and the languages of people, they have also in India been very active. That interaction has been very active. That power has learned from people, and people have been empowered by power, so to say. And of course, Professor Pollock is here, so he would be able to tell all of us much better. But for example, the Jains in Gujarat, when the Jains come close to Sanskrit, or when Sanskrit comes close to the Jain tradition, it acquires a particular flavor.
Right.
And earlier with the Buddhists, the Vedics, and the Sankhyas, so various, and you have explored, sir, those various shades and various flavors of Sanskrit, like almost nobody else has done in history of learning.
Well, actually, it's there are several questions on the table that are very much worth exploring. The Sudhanshu mentioned this beautiful contrast between languages of power and languages of the people. I wish I had thought of that phrase. Actually, it's a lovely phrase. I want to just talk about that for 1 second, then maybe we could return to the question of the current language pedagogy and what's wrong with it and why they're separated up in an often disabling way. But let me just say a couple of things about Sanskrit as a language of power. I begin the book. I mean, there's no doubt that for some of its history and for some of its representatives, Sanskrit was a language of powerful domination. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I begin, as I mentioned yesterday, speaking with some students at MS University Baroda, I begin my book with a discussion of a chapter in the Mimamsa Sutra. It's in the 6th book. It's called On the Exclusion of the Shudra, the Apashudra Adhikarana. And this is a discussion of why Shudras cannot participate in Vaidika culture and, as a result, in the world of Sanskrit learning. So, we know that at some level Sanskrit had an exclusionary dimension to it for a certain kind of Indian intellectual. But actually, Indian history shows that this exclusion was largely restricted to a very small group of people. What I mean to say is that Sanskrit, ultimately, the monopoly on Sanskrit was exploded, and it became a language of far greater social access than may be apparent from some of the more, shall we say, exclusionary writings of certain Brahmanical scholars. So much so, for example, that by the 2nd or 3rd century AD, Buddhists all over the world were using Sanskrit.
Yes.
Jains, who had long resisted the use of Sanskrit. In fact, there's a very famous story in a 13th century Jaina charita of Siddhasena who wanted to translate the Jaina scripture into Sanskrit. and he was excluded, he was excommunicated from the Jaina. But in fact, the Jains turned to Sanskrit very, very vigorously. This is true. This is true across social categories as well as religious categories. So there's a very interesting tension between the ideology of exclusion and the reality of access of Sanskrit. Now, so that's just one thing to say about this complicated problem of Sanskrit as a language of power. I think what we really need is a much deeper and richer social history of Sanskrit than has ever been written before. I only graze the surface of this deep and powerful question. Now, the place of language learning in the contemporary university is a very interesting question. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what's right and what's wrong about the division of language learning. I have my own thoughts about this, but I would love to hear your ideas about the current state of affairs.
In fact, the position begins with what Sir wrote somewhere, that a person like Hemchandrachari, he would write the grammar of Prakrit, but he was used Sanskrit as the language of codifying knowledge.
Yes.
That means a poet could operate in 2, 3 languages, 4 languages, and very easily coexist simultaneously in all of them. What the colonial situation, both of you have written a lot about that. We have heard Sir also on that point, that during that particular period, the early phase of Indologists or Orientalists, say up to 1825, those who admired, and before the Anglicist phase began, 1825 to 1857. Before that, one could see the kind of admiration for Sanskrit. But in the course of time, another tendency begins, where native scholars, their talent, the way they work, that was made use of by the Indologists, and then they, with some kind of commitment to it, certain methodology, made use of it. The best way one can see in the kind of these modalities that Professor, I forget the name, Colonialism and Its Forms of Power, in that book, that famous anthropologist.
Oh, Bernard Cohn.
Right. Yeah, Bernard Cohn. Right. He worked on that.
Colonialism and its forms of knowledge.
Forms of knowledge.
Right,
yeah.
right.
7 modalities that are worked out. During this period, what happens is, on the one hand, there is a strain of scholarship that admired Sanskrit, early part of Sanskrit, of course, but this is not used either by the colonizers or by the native scholars to empower the people who were dispossessed of power. If today, for instance, we had your interview in Times of India, and there is a small letter there, and the letter says, by some reader, it says that Dalits should learn Sanskrit. The argument that comes from Vivekananda, he said that these bhashas, this lok bhashaikaran, I will not use the word vernacularization of knowledge, but that took place, that was wonderful phenomenon. But at the same time, if these people, if Sanskrit would have been learnt by them, they would have, their status would have grown up automatically, because Sanskrit was the language of differentiation or demarcation in a way. What might have happened is a world of conjecture. But it is during this period that different single language departments came in existence in this country. And wherever, say for instance, School of Languages in Gujarati University, with very good ideals, it came up, but we as the teachers failed it, because the system of 20% of some other literature that should be taught, say in Sanskrit, those who are studying Sanskrit literature, 20% of Gujarati literature or English literature they should have. in Gujarati they should learn, but then the entire program failed there. I put it in a very lighter way. The timetable committee failed it. They could not allot the classes perhaps once people like Joshi ji left. The situation at the moment is that symbiotic relationship and the transformation and I would say the transfer of knowledge from Sanskrit to our bhashas, that has taken place. Because most of the good scholars of our bhashas, they are good scholars of Sanskrit also. So if I have to learn Sanskrit, I will not go to a professor of Sanskrit department, I will go to Sir. Because he is exposed to all three traditions, English, Sanskrit and this. So this insulation led to a kind of inaccessibility to the knowledge that was existing about the land on which Department of English stood. So the people of the Department of English never thought it proper to read Gujarati literature. And though in Gujarati there were quite a few scholars, Sir is one of them, Suresh Joshi, all of them took whatever was the best available in Europe, not only in English but other European languages.
Right.
That did not take place. And despite this translation and all these things being paraded in our country, sincere efforts are not made. So comparative literature, except for Jadavpur, it has almost failed. We are trying in our way, like in our literary theory paper, we are teaching Sanskrit poetics also.
Right.
Yeah, and out of 5 units, 1 unit is this. And when initially said there was an opposition to it, that this is Sanskrit poetics, how can you teach? I said Plato and Aristotle did not write in English. If we can read Greek and Roman critics
Through translation.
We can have this particular situation. Still a kind of sincere and committed effort to our own knowledge systems on part of the fraternity of the academicians and all, that is still not there. And this is something very, very alarming, at least for us. Like, if we do not know Gujarati literature, we cannot perhaps know the English literature from our perspective, and we would certainly fail when we would try to write, say what you mentioned, literary history of one particular language.
Let me just jump in with a couple of thoughts, and then Sudhanshu can respond. First, on the question of Dalits in Sanskrit, one of my dearest friends in my life was a literary scholar of Kannada named D.R. Nagaraj, who passed away in 1998, tragically, in his 42nd year. D.R. and I talked a lot about, he was one of the great theorists of Dalit culture, and we studied Kannada and Sanskrit together. He taught me some Kannada, I taught him some Sanskrit. And our position, and I hope I can speak for him on this, is that if you do not master the past will master you. And how do you master the past? You master the past not by ignoring it, but by learning the languages of the past. There would be nothing more powerful than to have young Dalit people in India learning Sanskrit in a powerful way in order to critique the abuses of the past. So, in a sense, knowledge is power, and learning Sanskrit is the capacity to critique whatever was oppressive about the Sanskrit tradition. Now, the other issue that's of very profound importance to me, although I love India, but I'm an outsider to India, but I've spent my life thinking about Indian culture and learning what little I could about Indian culture. And what I see developing, Sudhanshu knows this because I've been talking to him about it at great length, is a growing incapacity of young students to learn the classical languages of India. I don't just mean classical languages, Sanskrit and Old Tamil. I mean the classical Gujarati. How many people can read in Gujarat today, can read 13th and 14th century Gujarati? How many people can read Old Kannada? I guarantee you, you can count them on one hand. When we were doing the literary cultures in history book, even in the case of Bangla, there are many brilliant scholars of Bengali today who have brilliant things to say about Tagore and so on up to the present day. But how many people can read 18th century Bengali literature? Vidyasundar. How many people could read that text? How many people could read Chaitanya Charitamrita or the Vaishnav Pads? I think that there are very, very few, and this is true in Andhra. I mean, we were thinking about making an appointment of somebody to do classical Telugu literature when I was teaching at the University of Chicago. We couldn't find anyone who really felt at home in the classical Telugu idiom. So my appeal to young people in India is to recover these extraordinary literary traditions of the past by fundamentally and profoundly learning the languages that are the glory of India. Not simply concentrating on the contemporary period, but thinking about the deep histories of these extraordinary languages. And these are and I'm talking about the bhashas. The Asia Bhasha literatures are as rich as any in the world. And I think we're standing in 2006 on the point of almost no return. We're almost at the point of no return, where we will have lost the capacity, people in India will have lost the capacity to read their pasts. Let me give you one analogy, and then I'll pass the baton to Siddhanshubai. I met a man who worked for UNESCO. He was in charge of the restoration of the British cathedrals. And this was actually, I met him in Vijayanagar, of all places, in Hampi, many years ago, when there was a conference on the preservation of cultural heritage. He said that in England today, it is no longer possible to find any craftsman who can make a key arch. The technology, the artisanal technology for making a key arch has disappeared in England. That, I think, is what we're about to lose in India, the capacity to read our literary past. And I say our because I feel like I feel like an Indian.
We feel the same thing about it. I think that brings us to the process of learning. And I, being physically the oldest, have the privilege of saying what it is to learn at any age. For example, when Professor Sheldon Pollock invited some of us, first at Hyderabad, and later on, every year, 2 or 3 conferences, either in the United States or Europe or India, all the papers were distributed beforehand, and everybody came fully read with papers. And a book came out of this. It is called Literary Cultures in History, Reconstructions from South Asia. I learned so much. In Sanskrit there is a saying, Pashya Patataror Mule, Vruddha Shishya, Guru Yuva, and in Guru Yuva also. So capacity to learn and willingness to learn is something with which we must go to our past. Because there are masters in the past, not in the sense of those who just tell you what to do, but those who tell you how to know and how to talk about your knowledge. And at different periods of our history, different texts become our gurus. So Professor Pollock very often told us, see as they see. We must see at 19th century as 19th century Indians saw, and 15th century as 15th century Indians saw, and so on. So that is one thing. Go humbly and with alert mind to a text and contextualize it in history and learn so much from it. Second learning I got is from a series of seminars and conferences that Professor Avdesh Kumar Singh held in Rajkot. Rajkot is a remote place, not very favorable for English studies. But he converted that problem into an opportunity by amalgamating English with modern Indian languages, and Saurashtra was alert to that. Everybody came there because everybody felt that this is not a foreign language department, this is my own language department. And sir, now you bring that strength to the Ambedkar Open University, Baba Saheb Ambedkar Open University, because this is exactly what is happening today, right now, that we are talking about so many languages. Umashankar Bai, whom you remembered, Avdesh Bai, used to say, Sarva Bhasha Saraswati. Now, while Sarva Bhasha is important, as Professor Pollock has taught us, Saraswati is even more important. Because in Sarva Bhasha, Saraswati speaks in different ways. Sometimes in Margi, sometimes in Deshi, and sometimes in ways which need newer titles or newer ways of description. So I enjoy learning, and I have learned very deeply and very gratefully from Professor Shannon Pollock, as several of us have, and I have equally much learned from all the seminars that Professor Avdesh Kumar Singh used to hold.
So this is nothing but your magnanimity. I know both of you are tired, and you have a long way to travel also. But two questions of my own interest, that brief questions, of course, and one is like in your book on literary historiography, that's how I call it, that the South Asia as a category, that is something, you know, I felt as if it is from something like area studies coming to us. Whereas when we look at the bhashas and languages, most of them happen to come from India. So then South Asia, what is it? I think I'm not able to put that properly. Second thing is, the work that you do, I can, if I do not use the words correctly, you working in the line of Indologists or Orientalists, not in the Edward Saadian sense. So where does Indology, according to you, stand today in terms of the past? So if we can have a few moments from both of you, because I don't think I will have better people to answer these two questions.
Well, I can be very quick about the first question. I was involved in an anthology of world literature that was published in 6 volumes several years ago. I was responsible for Indian literature, and I introduced this. The section was called South Asian Literature. It was given to me by the publishers, and I introduced this selection by an essay called "Where is South Asia?" And when you begin, naming is a huge problem. Naming is a huge problem. This area in which we're sitting now has had many, many names over many, many centuries. South Asia is perhaps the ugliest of these names, but it's. Is India better? Where is India? When does the word India come into being? I mean, that's a word that comes ultimately from the Greek, and then it's then rehabilitated or used by Arab-speaking people, and then by Farsi-speaking people. Al-Hind. No name for this region is very good. And one of the things we try to do in the introduction to the book is unsettle the very idea of place. There are lots of different ways of configuring literature in place. South Asia, I agree, is an unhappy collocation. It does emerge out of the security state concerns of the United States in post-Second World War America. It's a term invented by the State Department, I believe, of the United States. But think of Indonesia. The name Indonesia was invented by a German anthropologist in 1895. All names are problematic. But let me say then a word about Indology today. I was talking yesterday about the fact that the day that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh came to Cambridge University, Cambridge eliminated Sanskrit as a field of study at Cambridge University, and I understand from colleagues in Germany that the Berlin Senate is considering eliminating Sanskrit at the University of Berlin. So Sanskrit is under a kind of threat these days, and I'm very interested in this fact. And I would never criticize my colleagues, but I want to say this. I think Sanskrit has a vast importance for human knowledge, but it has to be critical Sanskrit. It has to be theoretically sophisticated. It has to learn from the social sciences. It has to learn from the human sciences. It has to take history seriously. It has to take the critique of Sanskrit seriously. It's got to think about the relation between Sanskrit and the Desha Bhashas. It's got to think seriously about the end of Sanskrit as a knowledge formation. If we learn the right questions to ask of Sanskrit and learn to ask them in a critical way, Sanskrit has a central role to play in the development of human knowledge. And I think it's tragic that there are administrators in European universities that can't see that. The question is, who is to blame for that? I think that part of the blame falls on Sanskritists ourselves, that we've been unable to convince, to show the world the importance of our subjects. And for me, that's the most pressing need, is to demonstrate the role of Sanskrit in the deepening of human knowledge.
Yeah, that's right. If let me transform what Professor Sheldon Pollock has said with such depth and clarity. Let me transform that into a metaphor. Suppose you are in a garden moving around and you see someone standing near a particular plant and deeply inhaling the fragrance of a flower, and you see great happiness on that person's face. You would go from whatever corner you are to that spot, and you would also start breathing deeply and trying to get the fragrance which has made someone so happy. In the garden of world literature, I today see Professor Sheldon Pollock standing near the plants of Sanskrit language and literature and Indian culture, and breathing deeply and feeling so happy. I am sure that others would feel tempted that if he's so happy, let me also be happy. So first thing is...
This is the difference between pure academician critics and poet critics.
So that is one thing, that one must feel happy to critically understand a language and a literature. And if there is a great person in our midst, Gandhiji talked of ahimsa and he was so happy. So others also felt, okay, let's see what this is. Why is he so happy? So there is human curiosity. Let me approach this from the other end, this question of South Asia and India. And I met Professor Pollock, I met Gugi Thiongo in Berlin once, and he was speaking of charting and cartography as something very violent, because the European cultures imposed a chart on Africa and made artificial states, which is now problematic. Similarly, I think all the borders which are politically dominated are violent borders. They breed violence and they come out of violence.
Correct.
When I was editing the Encyclopedia of Indian Literature, somebody else was the chief editor before me. So the whole thing was organized very much on strict lines of what the Constitution of India says is India today. Now this is literature which predates several events, important and holy event as they are. Literature predates anything that is holy or anything that is unholy. In fact, it predates this whole concept of holy and unholy. It predates political power. It predates all sorts of powers. It is joy and its curiosity and its creativity. So I told them that I would not have an entry on the Indian novel. Because while Indian novel could certainly be dated very properly, there is a beginning of Indian novel. But that is not the beginning of Indian narrative. And if novel is a narrative, then yes, novel came at one spot, but it was not as if there was no narrative. So, and then if you go into narrative, you can't stop at the present borders of the Republic of India. You have to spill out into Bangladesh and Ceylon, and while China really, may really want to keep Tibet forever, but Indian literature overflows the border and goes there. And the Manas Sarovar, our Manas Sarovar is there. Our Manas Sarovar is there. In short, South Asia is a name. Let us sort of use it in our own way and be done with it. But always learn that literature is overflowing and crossing of borders.
Right.
And above all, this joy, critical joy of enjoying this would permit us to go beyond South Asia and India and Hind and Hindustan and Aryavarth and all the different names, and then we would just have the fragrance of the soil and we'll keep it on our head gesture, which is so Indian.
Very nice.
I think keeping the paucity of time in mind, I would conclude this with the permission of both speakers, this particular session. And I think our university would ever remain grateful to both of you, sirs, for sparing time, being with us. And whenever our academic fraternity would see or hear what transpired in this particular studios, would certainly be encouraged, inspired to take a few clues and work on them, because the words from both the scholars of eminence about Sanskrit, about our bhashas, the symbiotic relationship between and amongst them, and the way our department should work would make us think in our own way, and we are all sure that we would be benefited to a good extent by that.